America is once again facing the horror of political violence. Charlie Kirk was not elected to any high office, but he was an enormously influential voice on the right of American politics. He was only 31 years old. He leaves behind him a wife and 2 young children. He was a friend of President Trump, and he did a huge amount to get President Trump elected for his second term. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Sarah here in the BBC's Washington Bureau.
And it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it is Marianna sitting next to Justin in the worldwide headquarters.
Only one subject to discuss today. Marianna, bring us up to date. Tell us what we know about what happened.
So I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening to this episode, Americasters, will have heard the news about Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, who was 31 years old, was a very, very prominent conservative activist, social media influencer, media personality. He has a huge following online. His accounts, the accounts are just massive. And he was doing this tour around, he was starting this tour around different university campuses because he's really well known for having debates with students about particular issues, people he doesn't agree with, people he agrees with. And he was at Utah Valley University yesterday speaking inside a white tent when he was shot and killed. There are loads of very, very, very graphic clips of this, which, to be honest, have been quite hard to miss, really. And that are quite disturbing. And he was actually answering a question about mass shootings in America just moments before he was killed. He speaks quite a lot about things like gun rights, etc. And as ever, that means there's a huge vacuum in terms of people speculating about why this happened and how it happened and everything else.
When you say right at the beginning, Marianne, he's a huge figure. You can't overestimate, actually, can you, his reach, really, among young Americans, the importance of him. I was talking to a congressman earlier today who said he actually thought that Donald Trump would not have won last time round without Charlie Kirk's help. So he was an extraordinary figure. He brought to Trump a load of young people who I don't think otherwise would have bothered to vote. He energized them. Some would say he radicalized them. But it's a much more varied thing, isn't it, than just the politics of him? Because he had this podcast. And my daughter, Clara, the American citizen, very aware of him, actually knew about the attack on him and his death before I did. Friends of hers, I was talking to her, who are not American citizens, just young people in Britain in their 20s. An awful lot of people know about Charlie Kirk and feel, whether they agree with him or not, and plenty actually who are aware of him don't necessarily agree with him because he had some pretty extreme views on all sorts of things. But there is just this sense, exactly as you said, he was a talker. He was someone who wasn't just spouting off his own stuff and just putting it out there. He actually wanted to engage people. And it seems to me, isn't that right, Sarah, that is the key to who he was and what he was trying to do?
Oh, absolutely. And he was prolific. I mean, he was a broadcaster and a podcaster spreading this message, but at the same time, he was out there organizing youth groups and students, as well as taking part in live debates himself all of the time. And that was one of the things that he did. He said he would take on and debate anybody who wanted to come and disagree with him. So rather than being somebody who did exist in their own echo chamber, he was very much taking on debates from the left, people who had a different point of view and hashing that out. Now, as you say, there were a lot of people who didn't agree with him, but among those who think that he was absolutely material to Donald Trump being returned to the White House is Donald Trump himself and close members of his family and many important people in the administration. So they are in shock at the moment about this. I was at the White House yesterday when the news came in that he had been shot. And there were gasps around the place and people looking extremely worried about it. It became obvious quite quickly that the White House had a bit more information than was being released publicly yet. And Donald Trump started referring to Charlie Kirk in the past tense before there had been an announcement about him actually having been killed. By the time that information was widely known, people were openly in tears, White House staff. And a lot of people then gathered on the North Lawn to watch the flags over the White House being lowered to half-mast, which happened pretty quickly. And you could tell. There's always shock when there's a political killing like this. But this was sadness, grief, and anger that was perpetrating the White House. And that is a measure of what a big figure Charlie Kirk was, but also what impact this might have.
Yeah, I don't really think it's possible to overstate how influential someone like, well, how influential Charlie Kirk has been, because in lots of ways he's the pioneer of a certain type of blueprint for a certain type of political influencer or activist in the social media age. He started this group, Turning Point USA, when he was just 18, and the whole point of it was to spread conservative ideals, to talk about conservative issues, discussions at what were considered liberal-leaning, left-leaning US colleges. And he absolutely, like Sarah said, is someone who has perhaps become best known for being willing to debate people, often on very, very controversial subjects. And I know that I always talk about the algorithms. In fact, it's almost as much as I talk about Elon Musk. But I think it is worth saying that one of the reasons why Charlie Kirk was so effective at what he did is because he was very, very good at getting that content, clips of him, clips from his podcast, promoted to people beyond the echo chamber as well, people who don't agree with you, because a lot of this is about outrage. It's often what we call sort of rage bait, and his positions, therefore, there are some people who really, really, really took serious offence to some of the positions he held, and others who liked them.
Let's hear a few of those positions.
Why I believe that abortion should be legal is because of instances like rape and incest, but I already know that your belief on that, because you've already stated that if your daughter were to be raped at 10 years old, you would make her give birth to the baby.
Well, the baby would be delivered, and let me tell you why. And so, but first of all, let me try to find common ground.
Okay.
If I say we will make rape and incest abortions legal and get rid of all the other abortions, would you agree with that?
Yeah, see, I don't believe that abortion should be used as a form of birth control.
So 99% of the time it is. That's all that we're debating in the country right now. So Charlie Kirk's position is a very fringe minority. People are talking about still exceptions, so we should get rid of 99% of abortions.
I'm a gay conservative, and I just want to kind of ask you, like, what do you have to say for people like me who kind of feel like, I guess, it's kind of hard for gay conservatives because there's not a lot of us. So, like, what do you have to say to other gay people who need to realize, like, they do have a choice?
Yeah, first of all, welcome to the conservative movement. I don't think you should introduce yourself just based on your sexual attractions.
No, I agree. I like
because that's not who you are.
I like to be thought of as a person, and
for sure, you are a complete human being, and I'm sure you treat people well, and you're studying something. So I want to get away with this idea that you're gay anything. I just think that we have gone a long way in the negative direction in this country, where we act as if the most important part of your identity is what you do in the bedroom. It doesn't mean that much to me, but if you ask from a perspective as a Christian, I don't agree with that lifestyle.
You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. Wow. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
I'm sorry. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, right. that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out say no.
No, and I appreciate.
But like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that.
That last clip that we heard there was really fascinating, because that was with Gavin Newsom. And Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, when he decided to do outreach to those who are the enemies of the Democrats, the first person he chose was Charlie Kirk. And for all that he's labelled by some as an extremist and all the rest of it, he felt that Charlie Kirk was the right person to come on his show and to defend, indeed to proselytise for the right-wing point of view. And he, Gavin Newsom, would come up against him. And of course, their discussion there caused quite a news stir, because Newsom chose, I don't think it was forced out of him by Charlie Kirk, but Newsom chose that moment to say, on this issue, Charlie Kirk, which is men in women's sports, Gavin Newsom was willing to be persuaded by Charlie Kirk.
Some Americasters might be a little bit shocked by some of the things that he said in that montage, because they're not part of mainstream debate in the UK, but they are, of course, talked about much, much more often in the US. And that's one of the things that Charlie Kirk did, was not just enthuse young people and get them involved and excited in politics, but he moved issues, like what he's talking about on abortion, on race, into the mainstream argument. He was material in taking what were kind of fringe ideas about 10 years ago or something and turning them into mainstream political discourse, which, of course, allowed space for Donald Trump to come in and maximize that, because he wasn't just somebody who disseminated a Trump message. He helped to shape that message. He took some of Donald Trump's more raw political instincts and had a way of honing them into something that was easier and better to communicate than Donald Trump himself sometimes articulates these things, and spread them through the political debate, making them both acceptable, popular, and thus paving the way for Donald Trump, and very much certainly for his second term. So, and this is one of the reasons why he will be missed so very, very badly by people in the administration who are devastated by this, and by people in the wider movement, because he was an intellectual of it all, who both had his fingers on the pulse of the grassroots and could report that back to the White House, and also take what Donald Trump wanted to do and help find a way of selling that. And that's almost certainly why Donald Trump sounded quite as angry as he did when he recorded a video in the Oval Office that he then put out last night.
This is a dark moment for America. Charlie Kirk traveled the nation, joyfully engaging with everyone interested in good faith debate. His mission was to bring young people into the political process, which he did better than anybody ever, to share his love of country and to spread the simple words of common sense. On campuses nationwide, he championed his ideas with courage, logic, humor, and grace. It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
I was shocked when I watched the president doing that last night, because that is certainly not the message you normally get from top politicians at a time like this, when there has been this kind of political violence and atrocity. It's usually a moment of unity, when everybody from all sides of the political debate come together and condemn political violence. And that's what was happening with every living former president put out a statement saying this is completely unacceptable. This is not who America is. It is undermining our democracy to have political violence like this. But not Donald Trump, who, of course, he was angry, but was demonizing part of the political debate, blaming them for Charlie Kirk's murder. And he then went on to list a number of other Republicans who've been attacked, referencing, of course, the attempt on his own life in Butler last year, which was absolutely terrible. Other right-wingers who've been attacked. But he left off that list the Minnesota lawmaker who was shot in her home with her husband a few months ago, another one who was attacked. He missed out the attack on Josh Shapiro, the Democrat governor's house in Pennsylvania. You know, he listed only people from the right who had been attacked and blamed the left for it. And I was genuinely worried that it sounded incendiary. And I think, Justin, we've had an email on this topic as well, haven't we?
Yeah, it comes from Mike in Portsmouth, who says, I've just watched Trump's response to the Charlie Kirk shooting. He seems to be going full partisan rather than trying to calm the situation. He's pouring mountains of petrol on it. Can you have a mountain of petrol? Anyway, yeah, he says, Mike also says it's almost as if he's going to use it as an excuse to try and become ever more authoritarian, even more authoritarian than he was trying to become anyway. Am I reading it wrong? Mike asks. I hope so, because from where I'm sitting, the omens of that response are not good. I was thinking as well, just to back up what you were saying, Sarah, as well, when we were listening to Charlie Kirk on the subject of abortion, it's not so much of a big deal now, is it? But certainly when I was doing your job, attacks on abortion clinics were a really big deal. Attacks by people who regarded themselves as right-wing and abortion as a progressive left cause, which I suppose it generally is, and abortion rights as a progressive left cause. And it became, when you go to an abortion clinic, as we all have done in our professional lives, to go and talk to people, because it has been such an issue in American politics and culture recently, there is security, there is real fear, and there were killings as well. I mean, there were murders. So it's not just that Minnesota case that you mentioned that is from this year. There is also a wider way in which, if you are on the left, the kind of moderate left, you might say, well, hang on a second. Donald Trump should have mentioned, exactly as Sarah said, Marianna, should have mentioned a few other things as well.
It's a little bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation here, where you've got politicians, including the president, criticising what they perceive to be demonising and violent rhetoric from the left, which they feel could have contributed to the climate in which this happened. But then that seems to have further fueled this really divisive rhetoric. So you've got Donald Trump speaking like this. You need only scroll on X. Obviously, there is a huge amount of grief, outpouring of support, upset for Charlie Kirk, his wife, his 2 little kids. But then there's also there's really violent language being used to kind of say, right, we need retribution. This is it. We've had enough. The left need to stop this. And then if you look on, for example, TikTok, which has got a bit of a different demographic to X, you've then got people on the left who are saying, well, hang on a second, these kinds of influencers use violent rhetoric and the politicians do on the right. And this is the consequence of that. And it becomes this, it further entrenches the polarization, which people have said that they're worried about.
Yeah. Sarah, my feeling, I think you're exactly right in what you were saying about what Trump said. But there is a sense, isn't there, and it's a reasonable sense, that a lot of people on the right in America recently, including Donald Trump himself, have been targeted, called authoritarian, called fascist, called whatever. And that has somehow allowed a whole cohort of people, and it is often young people, and it's often online, so maybe they don't quite mean it or whatever, to use incredibly violent rhetoric in a way that maybe they wouldn't have done in the past. I mean, I'm thinking, Sarah, about Luigi Mangione, the guy who was accused of killing that insurance executive in New York. People will remember he was shot in the street. He's got a wife and a young family. I mean, that death, it's not putting it too sharply to say it's been actually celebrated by some on the American left who say the insurance companies have got it coming to them and this individual had it coming to him, etc. There is a kind of nastiness there that, albeit I agree with you about Trump, generally speaking, but he is pointing at something that is real.
Oh, he is. He is. Just because I'm saying he wasn't, he didn't reflect that it was happening on both sides doesn't mean that he hasn't put his finger on something about the vicious language that's used on both sides of the debate. But yes, people like Charlie Kirk are regularly being compared to Nazis and mass murderers. Luigi Mangione genuinely celebrated around the country by some people who think it was heroic to go up to a healthcare executive and murder them in the street. And when you have reached a point where people are applauding political violence, it's frightening. And of course, we know that Donald Trump feels this very viscerally because he knows how close he came to losing his life just over a year ago in Butler, Pennsylvania. So, and then there was another pretty realistic assassination attempt on him a few months later as well. So, he feels it, viscerally how frightening this is. So I'm not surprised that he's got, a pretty strong reaction to it.
I do think that we should also point out, when we talk about examples of violence that have happened across the political spectrum, including targeting people on the left. We think of, for example, the attack on Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House's husband, which was that happened a couple of years ago now. And then also examples of lawmakers who have lost their lives and political violence that was triggered, for example, by the suggestion that the election was stolen when Joe Biden won. There was also on the right support for some of the people who'd done this stuff. There were people who kind of celebrated the man who attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband or spread conspiracy theories about that. So I think it's worth saying that the level of polarization here is huge. Like, both sides are guilty of rejoicing and celebrating. I think what people on the right on social media would argue is, well, yeah, okay, we'll do that, but we are much more open to debate and discussion, and the left aren't. The left would say, well, hang on a second, you are always the people telling us that words don't matter online. It's inconsequential. Why are you worried about the consequence of it, etc.? And now you are. So there's like levels of hypocrisy sort of across the board here when it comes to the positions that people are taking. I think what is worth explaining, though, when we talk about that language that Donald Trump used and actually some of the language that's being used on X, which is really quite violent and quite scary. I spend a lot of my time hanging out on social media and on X, and this language is incredibly common. I think people can't, there are lots of people who are really shocked today because they're looking at it, but it's used all the time. And I think that visceral reaction that we're seeing online, and even from the president, comes down to what a big deal Charlie Kirk was and how he felt like a family member or someone who was really, really close to Donald Trump and actually to huge amounts of the American public who knew him really, really well. Last night on the Megyn Kelly show, conservative media commentator Emily Jasinski, she captured this, which is why people feel this is so emotional.
Yeah, and just to say about Emily, before we play the clip, and it's a really interesting exchange because it's with Megyn Kelly, isn't it, who we also talked to. I think we've talked to on the pod, and I've certainly talked to on my other job in the Today programme. I don't know her as well, but Emily, I know well. And she is a conservative commentator, but she's also someone who's very fair-minded, and this exchange, I think, which you're going to introduce now, I think is fascinating because in a sense it underlines what Sarah's just been saying, that this is a really big cultural deal as well.
I mean, he's almost as close to monoculture as Gen Z gets. Everybody felt like they knew Charlie Kirk. Even if they didn't like Charlie Kirk, they felt like they knew Charlie Kirk. They felt like they knew Charlie Kirk and they saw him grow up. And so I think you've mentioned this a couple of times. We are, if anything, underestimating as a society right now how profoundly this will reverberate on the culture.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know if the left fully comprehends how important he was to us. I really don't. I'm not sure they appreciate. They tried to marginalize him and make him into this fringy character who was just some sort of nutcase who would go on campuses and stir up shit. And that is such a misrepresentation of this noble person.
Yes, love him or hate him, I think the left would make a big mistake if they were to underestimate the influence that Charlie Kirk had, but also the affection within which he was held because of the way he conducted himself. He had very confrontational points of view. He had some quite controversial ideas, but he was always, he was open to debate. He was genial. He was extremely charismatic. And he clearly had quite a long way to go in American politics as well. So, he will be seen as a martyr. Donald Trump described him as a martyr last night. And that's going to have a pretty profound influence as well, I think.
And it's worth mentioning, isn't it? I mean, when it comes to being a cultural icon, if we're really underlining just how key he was and what a big hole is going to be there now and how angry people are going to be on South Park in any way, shape or form. I mean, Donald Trump is a lot at the moment and possibly in a form and a shape that he doesn't want to be. But for most people, it's the honour of a lifetime to be parodied on South Park. And in the current series of South Park, Charlie Kirk was, and he liked it.
First of all, I just think it's hilarious. And secondly, the whole thing is like, wait, so a campus thing I've been doing for 13 years to debate random college kids has now been so important that it gets prominent primetime placement on Comedy Central. I think the whole thing is just awesome and hilarious. There's so much more I want to say about this, but the whole shtick, by the way, Comedy Central, South Park, you crushed the water. I compulsively drink water on campus. It's like, okay, boom, we got to stay hydrated. Now, the lozenges, we got to work a little. And by the way, the Holy Bible right next to it. I even said on this campus tour I was going to bring a Holy Bible with me to every single campus stop.
I mean, that does sum up to a certain extent the way in which he was, he was able to take a message out into the wider culture and enjoy and not mind being mocked about it. That was part of his charisma.
I think it's interesting as well when we think about, like, we're obviously talking about the impact that this has on the United States, but actually to this point I was making about how he's kind of a blueprint for this new type of political activist, social media influencer. He is so well known around the world. Like, there'll be people waking up in every country who will know him because social media has no borders and his stuff is everywhere. Like, I look at my social media feed, and obviously my undercover voters, my fictional characters' feeds are a little bit tainted with American politics, but my own feed, I get this kind of stuff all the time. There's British teenagers debating with him. He's come over here to the UK and done these debates at Oxford University. You know, it's just really profound, this, in terms of what he is. And you imagine that actually one of the consequences of this is that there will be quite a lot of, well, I don't know. See, on the one hand, you think, well, maybe it will inspire more young Americans to think, I want to do that. I want to get into political activism. I want to have a social media platform. I want to do this, regardless of your views. The flip side is seeing people who are celebrating it. You think, oh, hang on, does anyone really realise? It almost doesn't feel very real. Like, it's a bit like a video game. Like, you look at it, this horrifically violent clip, awful clip, and it's almost like it's all of this stuff has become so normal online that we don't really think about, or not we personally, but as society, think about the consequences of it. I think particularly for the kinds of people that watch and consume Charlie Kirk.
It's worth saying, isn't it, Sarah? And we maybe ought to have mentioned this more prominently, but we can mention it now, that mainstream Democratic politicians have been unanimous in coming out and making very strong statements, and senior people. So we heard from Obama, didn't we, and Biden and Gavin Newsom.
Every living president has.
Right, have they? Yeah. I didn't know that. They all have, yeah. But also, Sarah, more than that, you know, a lot of Democrats have made it absolutely plain that those who have celebrated this death are not speaking for them.
Oh, absolutely. And you even heard from Gabby Giffords, a former Democratic congresswoman who herself was shot a few years ago in an assassination attempt, saying that she was absolutely heartbroken and that this was completely terrible. And yeah, the normal response to condemn the violence and say that this must stop and it must not happen again has been through most of the political mainstream. But I think the issue here is that we're not just talking about on the fringes of the internet. We're talking about a lot of pretty senior and very influential people who either on social media or on television are going a bit further than they would normally and are talking about revenge and retribution. And you know, I've heard a lot of very important MAGA figures on TV using words like that. And it's not just on the right, you know, on the left as well. If you listen to what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to say, and this is a more measured message from her, but it's still not what you would expect in a moment like this.
We have a political assassination that happened at the same time as a school shooting where children are dying on the same day, a week after a shooting at a Catholic school where children were gunned down while praying. Are we going to do something, or are we going to argue over rhetoric? That is my question about this. We have to pass gun safety legislation and stop this.
What one congresswoman was yelling, a Republican said that it was Democrats' fault. Democrats did this. That's what we heard her say on the House floor.
I mean, people can finger point all they want. Look at the record. Look at the actions of what we are doing. I don't think a single person who has dedicated their entire career to preventing gun safety legislation from getting passed in this House has any right to blame anybody else but themselves for what is happening. We have to stop this. We can stop this.
Gosh, Sarah, we talked a little bit about Donald Trump's tone and whether he had hit the right tone, the kind of tone that you would expect in these circumstances. If she wants to be president, which I think she does, I'm not sure that is quite the tone either. I found that equally shocking, actually. I mean, given that this is a man of 31 with two little children, if that's the reaction from someone who wants to be in the mainstream of American politics, she wants to be president, she wants to appeal across the aisle to some extent, I suppose, to the extent that gets you to the presidency in this day and age, that seemed to me to be tonally wrong.
And she, of course, was responding to the fact that other elected politicians in Congress we're blaming Democrats for this happening. I mean, I can't remember a time when there has been finger pointing to this extent or at this level, and certainly not so quickly after somebody has been murdered, essentially in front of our eyes, because we can all see these kind of things now as well. This is why I think it feels to me that there is something slightly different about the tone here. Very different even than there was last year after the attempt on Donald Trump's life, which, when fortunately he was not badly injured. It's just there's something febrile in the way that people who frankly know better have been responding to this.
There was an old world in politics where there was a rule book and you did certain things when something bad happened and you calmed it down. And now that you're playing to your audience is online. Like if she doesn't sound like that, she'll get absolutely piled upon by the left-wing people that follow her, which is not to say that that's right, but you can see how, and also, she's consuming, like politicians themselves, particularly younger politicians, will be across the board consuming information in their echo chambers as well. So the way they view events is different as well. And lots of things can all be true at once. I think that the sad reality of this, which is the most difficult thing, is it doesn't even feel like everyone can agree on the fact that whatever you think or believe, you don't deserve to be killed.
Well, look, on that, let us give the last word then to the governor of Utah, because this happened, of course, as we were saying earlier, at a university in Utah. And quite soon afterwards, the governor spoke.
This is a dark day for our state. It's a tragic day for our nation. And I want to be very clear that this is a political assassination. He comes on college campuses and he debates. That is foundational to the formation of our country, to our most basic constitutional rights.
Now, that was somebody who did strike a mature tone, and I thought that was a very powerful speech that he gave there. And of course, he has absolutely hit the nail on the head as to what this means for debate and conversation and the free exchange of ideas, which is, yes, the foundation of democracy and essential to politics to operate at any kind of functional level.
Whenever we have these conversations, the conversation often centres on the different politicians involved. Obviously, it will centre on whoever is responsible for this, and that is completely understandable and makes sense. There is very little focus on, in my view, the social media companies, these very rich, unaccountable companies who, if you removed the platforms, if they didn't exist in the way they do, if algorithms and recommendation systems didn't exist in the way that they do, I don't think any of this would have ever happened. I don't think Charlie Kirk would exist in the way he does. I don't think the rhetoric and the debate would be as it is. And that's not to say political violence hasn't existed for absolutely ages, decades, centuries. Of course it has. But I just don't think it would be the same. And no one will be asking questions of what gets us to this point, really, because ultimately all of the politicians have to play that same system in order to even exist now.
Right. Okay, well, that's a really good point. My last thought is going to be slightly more optimistic, actually, and in a way taking issue with that. And I absolutely accept what Sarah said, that this is a really critical time for America. And not only was the event itself horrific, but the potential ramifications of it are horrific too. I absolutely accept that. But to your point about social media and all the rest of it, and you made the point yourself, Marianna, there's been political violence before. Oh my goodness, there's been political violence before in the United States. You think back to the late 60s and the early 70s, not only the assassinations that we know about, but also a huge amount of political violence kind of behind the scenes, of genuine domestic terrorism. America goes through these awful paroxysms of rage and distress and comes out of them the other side. And I think even if it is in one of those paroxysms now, there is still at least a chance, if not a good chance, that the nation will come to its senses.
The Republic will endure, I'm sure. But I just think for anybody who maybe wasn't that familiar with Charlie Kirk or his place in American politics, whilst these things have happened in history before, to give this its historical context, we have to consider that we may be living in one of those moments that you say, Justin, that America has endured before and come through. But, this is not minor league stuff that we're talking about now.
Okay.
My point would be, why? Why now? Why is this happening in this period of time? Which is for all sorts of reasons, but I don't think you can take the role of social media in it out of it.
Okay, well, we've certainly raised an awful lot of things that people are going to be thinking about and talking about, and we're going to hear unquestionably from Americasters. And we'll be discussing all of this and plenty of episodes to come. That's it for now from all of us. Bye-bye.